In the beginning, there was no furnace beneath your feet, no infinite torture chamber, no cosmic prison designed to keep your thoughts in line. There was only the earth, the body, and the silence of the grave. Today, hell feels inevitable, like it was always there, waiting in the shadows of Scripture. But when you trace the language, when you follow the translations, when you map the political needs of empires onto the theology of priests, a different picture emerges. Not a revelation, but a construction. Not an eternal truth, but a technology of power. Let's begin where the story actually starts. In the earliest Hebrew imagination, the dead did not split into separate destinies. There was no good place and bad place. There was Sheol. Sheol was not a courtroom. It was not a torture pit. It was not justice. It was the grave, the pit, the underworld where everyone went, righteous and wicked, kings and servants, faithful and apostate, all dissolved into the same dim silence. No moral sorting, no eternal spectacle, just the end. And that detail matters because it tells us something shocking. If early Israel had a religion of control, it wasn't built on afterlife terror. It was built on land, lineage, law, and social order, enforced in this life by courts and kings and priestly authority. So how did we get from the neutral grave to a metaphysical inferno? How did the silent pit become a weapon? The answer is hidden in a single move, a translation choice that smuggled a foreign cosmos into a sacred text. In the 3rd century BCE, Jewish scholars in Alexandria began translating Hebrew scripture into Greek, a version known as the Septuagint. They faced a problem. How do you render Sheol in Greek? They chose a word that seemed close enough: Hades. And in that moment, the gates opened. Because Hades was not a neutral grave. Hades was already a fully populated afterlife machine. A realm with geography, hierarchy, and moral mechanics, where souls could be judged, confined, punished, and categorized. Greek civilization had spent centuries building mythic architecture for death. And now that architecture was poured into Hebrew scripture like molten metal into a new mold. This wasn't a conspiracy written in ink. It was a cultural infection carried by language. Translation is never innocent. Every word is a gate. Every synonym is a choice about reality. And once Sheol became Hades, Scripture began to sound like the empire that carried it. But the Greek influence was only one stream feeding the furnace. There was another, older, sharper, more dualistic: Persia. After the Babylonian exile, Jewish thought did not develop in a vacuum. It developed under imperial pressure, alongside imperial religion. And Zoroastrianism, Persia's dominant spiritual framework, offered something irresistible to a wounded people: a cosmic explanation for suffering. In Zoroastrianism, reality is split: light versus darkness, truth versus the lie, a cosmic war, a final judgment, a resurrection of the dead, and a place of torment for the wicked. Notice what this does psychologically. It takes chaos and turns it into a story. It takes pain and turns it into evidence. It takes political defeat and turns it into cosmic drama. And when a society absorbs that framework, it also absorbs something else: a moral afterlife that can be used as leverage. Because if punishment doesn't end at death, then authority doesn't end at death either. This is the core of ecclesiastical power: to extend governance beyond the grave, to colonize the imagination so the individual polices themselves, even alone, even in thought, even in doubt. Now enter the 1st century, the world of Jesus, a world already saturated with competing afterlife models. Some Jewish groups imagined resurrection, some imagined judgment, some clung to older ideas. And into this unstable terrain, Jesus uses a word that later becomes gasoline for the doctrine of hell: Gehenna. Most people hear Gehenna and picture a supernatural realm, flames licking human souls for eternity. But to Jesus' audience, Gehenna was not invisible. It was geography, a place with a violent reputation, linked in memory to corruption, to child sacrifice, to the condemned rituals of earlier eras. and by the 1st century it functioned as a city dump, burning refuse continuously, smoke rising like a permanent warning on the horizon. So when Jesus said Gehenna, he wasn't necessarily mapping the metaphysics of the afterlife. He was deploying prophetic symbolism, using a familiar, disgusting, visible place to warn against corruption, especially among the religious establishment. And that changes everything, because it suggests the hell, later preached from pulpits, was not originally the centerpiece of the message. It was a metaphor weaponized into a literal cosmic threat. This is how myth becomes machinery. A symbol is turned into a location. A warning is turned into a doctrine. A metaphor is turned into a prison. But the construction wasn't finished yet. It needed enforcement. It needed institutional endorsement. And inside early Christianity, there was conflict. Not everyone agreed that God would torture endlessly. Some of the most influential early thinkers, Origen of Alexandria, Clement of Alexandria, taught Apocatastasis, the eventual restoration of all souls. In their view, divine justice was corrective, not infinite revenge. Punishment was medicinal, not eternal sadism. So how did the harsher model win? Follow the needs of power. As Christianity moved from persecuted sect to imperial instrument, theology had to change shape. A movement built on inner transformation became a structure of governance. A message of liberation was refitted into an apparatus of obedience. And one figure looms large in cementing the permanent view of hell, Augustine. According to the analysis in the source material, Augustine helped solidify the doctrine of an eternal, permanent hell within the Church, not just as an abstract teaching, but as a foundation stone for moral control. Because an infinite threat creates a certain kind of human, a human who fears curiosity, a human who mistrusts their own mind, a human who confuses submission with virtue. This is not merely theology. This is social engineering. And once hell becomes official, it becomes useful. A religion with an eternal torture chamber does not need constant physical force. It can outsource violence to the imagination. It can implant surveillance into the soul. You don't need soldiers in every home. If you convince people they are always watched, you don't need chains on every wrist. If you convince people doubt itself is a crime, you don't need prisons for the masses. If you build the prison behind their eyes, and the institution learned quickly how to deploy it. Consider the medieval church, where the boundary between spiritual authority and political authority dissolved into a single monolithic structure. One example preserved in the source material. Pope Gregory VII threatening eternal fire as leverage in a power struggle with Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV in 1076. Hell was not just preached to peasants. It was used against emperors. That is the signature of a true technology of power. It scales upward and downward. It disciplines the poor and negotiates with kings. When hell becomes a bargaining chip in geopolitical conflict, you are no longer in the realm of pure spiritual teaching. You are in the realm of institutional coercion. And here is the final unsettling pattern. Hell does not only punish the wicked, it protects the system. Because an institution that claims exclusive access to salvation also claims authority over fear. It can define what counts as sin. It can redefine what counts as rebellion. It can rename dissent as heresy, and then attach eternity to it. This is why doctrines of the afterlife matter. They are not merely beliefs. They are the operating system of a civilization, and the blueprint is ancient. Astrotheology, celestial symbolism, and religious astronomy was often used by priesthoods to anchor authority in the sky. When you convince a population that your laws are written into the cosmos, you make your hierarchy feel natural, unquestionable, as fixed as the stars. Hell is part of that same architecture, a cosmic extension of legal power, where earthly courts could fail. The afterlife court never misses a case where kings could be overthrown. The invisible judge remains enthroned. Where empires could collapse, the threat remains. So the question is not, is hell real? The deeper question is, who benefits when you believe it is? Because when fear governs the imagination, power governs the body. And if the history shows anything, it shows that the modern inferno did not drop fully formed from heaven. It was assembled piece by piece through translation, cultural interchange, imperial theology, and institutional necessity. Sheol became Hades, symbol became geography, debate became dogma, and dogma became a weapon, not a revelation, a regime. So the next time someone uses eternal fire to demand obedience, listen carefully, because you may not be hearing the voice of God. You may be hearing the echo of empires, smuggled through language, blessed by institutions, and aimed like a spear at the human will. And the most dangerous part, once installed, the doctrine keeps running. Even when the priests are gone, the prison is portable, the guard is internal, the fire is psychological. And that is how hell becomes real, not as a place beneath the earth, but as a mechanism inside the mind. In the next layer of this investigation, we'll follow the other figure that grows darker as hell grows hotter, the evolution of Satan, from prosecutor to cosmic villain to the perfect antagonist for a theology built on fear. Because every empire needs an enemy, and the most efficient enemy is the one you can't see.